This is why I still contend any program that wants to fire their head coach in the first month of the season should hire Ed Orgeron for the rest of the year. not
my God.
He's available. He seems like he wants to coach again.
Oh my God, It's money in the bank. Yes, he just comes running in and he goes, all right, who's ready? Let's go 7 games. Let's watch a video.
This is the College Football Enquirer with Ross Dellenger and Steven Godfrey. I am Andy Staples. And before we get started, I do want to remind you that if you would like to see the majesty of Steven Godfrey's sport coat in living color
every week,
turn on your smart TV, look for those icons, hit the Yahoo Sports Network, and you can watch the College Football Enquirer and all the other great Yahoo shows on the Yahoo Sports Network. They are in the free ad-supported television section of your smart TV, which is you turn it on, home screen's got all the icons. We're right there. Also, if you're on the go, you want to watch us on your phone or your tablet, yahoosports.tv. It's all there 24/7, 365. You can watch us anytime, anywhere, on any device. Gentlemen.
How many sports coats do you own?
Do I own?
Yeah.
5 or 6. But this is all right. Fine.
That's a nice one. It's like grayish. It's got like the like Starry Night.
It's sort of houndstooth. So let's break kayfabe right now. I don't wear a sport coat every day, but I'm not going to do this on air because our producer's going to worry about my shot frame. I would move the camera. There's a coat hook right here. I wear a T-shirt into my office, and I put this on because normally, and this isn't going to work because Andy's wearing blue today. For the first month we did this show, we were 3 middle-aged white guys in black T-shirts. We look like we look like some sort of alarming political rally or some sort of podcast.
We actually were going to sell the T-shirt that said College Football Enquirer, and on the back it was going to say 3 middle-aged white guys in black T-shirts.
There you go.
I mean, look, if you had turned the sound off, minus maybe the helmet in Andy's background, we could have been talking about anything, any number of alarming, weird podcasts like adrenochrome harvesting. So I was like, I'll throw on a sport coat just to create visual dynamic. And since then, these two have been obsessed with the fact that I'm showing up like an English lord every day because I have a jacket on.
The audience of this show, and I don't think I'm speaking out of school here. The audience of this show is relatively highbrow for a college football podcast. Dare I say the most intelligent audience of any college football show. And so I just like that you're leaning in to the erudite nature of our show.
I have to do something. I have to lean into the erudite nature because I'm the one on here who got kicked out of college the most. So I gotta class it up. Normally I look like an almond brother with a court date when I'm dressed up. So this is a bit. We're going to carry the bit. You guys love to talk about the sport coat. So now it's definitely not going away. And to Ross's point, I might, you know what? I might vary. It might be different next week. So this is
I want ruffle shirt.
I'll do that.
Bow tie, all of it.
Yeah.
Nice.
We might be in person together for this program in the near future. And if so, tails, top hat, cane.
There you go.
I'm wearing a tank top that day.
Do it.
Mr. Peanut.
Ross is the one who should be wearing the tank top. For those who don't know, Ross Dellenger's jacked.
Because he is.
No.
Oh, yeah. So, gentlemen, there was some news on Sunday. We told you as we were recording the show, this is probably going to happen. It had happened by the time the show dropped because it was very weirdly coordinated where everybody was awfully quiet about it for a morning. And then it's like, oh, by the way, we fired Sam Pittman at Arkansas. And
all three of us were told, I think, in special ways. I don't want to turn any cards over, but I think this is the first time in this trios collection on this show where we all came in before the mics got turned on, and we were like, "Oh yeah, Pittman's happening today." Yeah. So let's what we call in the biz future-proof our program, and we did.
Yeah, there you go. How about that? Yeah, the one thing that couldn't happen happened, right? They get Beba 40 points at home.
And the other thing is, so I get done with that. I do some on-3 work. Our on-3 team, people call Arkansas, people call the Pittman people call the Petrino people. And it's like, nope, not happening today. And then 15 minutes later, boom, there it is.
Yeah.
And
they did a good job of keeping it, it's hard. It's hard to keep a Power 4 conference head coaching change secret until, you release it. And they did a pretty good job of doing that. But there you go. So
The best,
good job.
The best
Arkansas.
example of keeping it secret till they drop the release I've ever seen, by the way, was not a firing, it was a hiring. It was when Nebraska hired Mike Riley. Because they drop it and everybody's like, wait, they wanted Mike Riley?
Yeah. Nobody was.
There's a reason nobody was on the trail.
Yeah, that's right. They didn't believe it.
I had this conversation recently, and I'll bring it up. In the years of like coach breaking and coach season, I only had this happen once where I heard about the Trent Dilfer hiring about 24 hours in advance. Shorter than that window, I tweeted out, I just heard, and I kind of confirmed it enough to where I was getting out in public and being like, I just heard a rumor that makes absolutely no sense for an open G5 job. And another reporter, I don't think he'll care, John Talty over at CBS. I've never had this happen.
Who lives in Birmingham?
Well, yeah, and because we're all friendly to a degree, and we all respect each other, but we don't really show each other our cards in the game. And Talty hits me up and he goes, "Did you hear that Trent Dilfer thing?" And I'm like, only because, not because we were competing or it was because it was such an incredulous piece of information to own before the public that you had to share it with somebody. It was like seeing an insane movie with a twist ending, and you had to talk about it afterwards with somebody. Right. And so Talty and I were just like, then we just let out a string of expletives, and we were like, what do they do? And and then of course Trent Dilfer won the American 3 times. We were totally proven wrong. He's based,
that's right.
Yeah, he's in line for the Notre Dame job. It's
there's probably somebody listening that believes that.
Really?
Maybe.
Okay.
I don't know. All right, but let's talk this Arkansas job because it's fascinating. It also ties into a story that Ross Dellenger just did on SMU and SMU in this era. Why? Because Rhett Lashley is the coach at SMU. Rhett Lashley is a son of Northwest Arkansas, former Springdale High quarterback. Arkansas has always been his dream job. But the question is it his dream job now, or is it anybody's dream job? And I've been doing a lot of thinking about this job over the last few weeks because obviously Sam Pittman has been sort of perpetually on the hot seat for the last 3 years. And I have changed my opinion. And the Arkansas fans came at me for something I said this summer. And I didn't get it at first, but the more I think about it, the more I think they're right. So here's the deal. We've obviously been talking about what's going to happen when this job opens for a while. We've talked about potential candidates, whether that's Rhett Lashley, Ryan Silverfield at Memphis, John Sumrall at Tulane, Eric Morris at North Texas, Colin Klein, the OC at Texas A&M. There's a lot of names that are floating around, and probably some more that I'm not mentioning here. And I kept saying, okay, but do you want to go to Arkansas now when Ole Miss is good, when Missouri is good, when Oklahoma and Texas just joined the SEC? Are you going to be perpetually buried? Are you going to be fighting to get out of 10th place? Because it feels like post Bobby Petrino, and remember, Bobby Petrino coached in an SEC that did not even have Texas A&M or Missouri except for his last year there. I believe his last year is 2012. So, or maybe, yeah. So I just was not sure it's possible to be successful there. And I had an Arkansas fan during my On3 show in the chat come at me and say, well, what did you say about the Ole Miss job before Lane Kiffin was hired? And I was like, you got me, because I said the same thing.
Yeah, the entire conversation, Andy, since Pittman's firing on Sunday has been pointing at the AP rankings and looking at the highest ranked SEC team in the AP right now, which is my alma mater, which should not be factually correct in any universe that I've lived in, because this was a job that comps to Arkansas. For I always call the modern era probably the advent of the BCS. So we're talking like late 90s on, when the money really starts to come into this sport from television. You had clearly defined upper tier SEC jobs, and then you had this Mendoza line of trying to survive, right?
The Fernando Mendoza line?
No, that would be a higher line because he might win the Heisman. Thank you. Alley-oop. Arkansas fans right now are sitting looking, and by the way, all the problems you posed, Andy, still technically exist. But what doesn't exist anymore is this impierceable upper tier, right? Because we just saw it in Alabama, Georgia, where we saw two teams that kind of felt even. And then, by the way, the loser of that game, Georgia, had beaten a Tennessee team that, by the way, just kind of got out of Starkville with the skin of their teeth, right? And so on. And you keep doing this. And this is what I alluded to on Sunday with this playoff era plus portal. We may have destroyed the pedestal of the SEC in favor of something where there's a tremendous amount of like upper half parity that's bigger and allows for, hypothetically, an Arkansas coach who recruits well, who has good rev share, who does well in the portal, to bust a 10-win season and get into the playoff one year.
Yeah. And Ross, I want to ask you this because you understand this better than most people, because all of this is kind of new. You have rev share, but you also have the legitimate NIL that is the supplement to rev share that everyone's chasing. The best way, it seems to me, the untrained eye, to get legitimate NIL is you have very willing corporate partners.
Yes, for sure. And Arkansas has plenty of those.
Incredibly willing corporate partners in Walmart, Tyson Chicken.
Yeah. Don't know if you guys noticed the Walmart logo on the field that Notre Dame was rushing past.
Yeah. In the corner of the stadium, in between like sort of a break in the stands, there was a big Walmart and the logo. Yes, and Tyson Chicken, and who else? We're from
JB Hunt Trucking, I believe. They're based there.
The holy trinity of Northwest Arkansas was always the trucking, the chicken, and then Walmart. Yeah. And this is, I know that sounds like a punchline to like a dumb red. It's not a Jeff Foxworthy joke, and that's before you even get into
it's a Jeff
Little
Bezos
Rock
joke.
Hey. Before you even get into Little Rock, which is also the consortium that might be pushing the interim coach, which we can talk about that in a second.
We were talking about Ole Miss versus Arkansas, and I would have said, I may still to a degree say that the Arkansas job is better because of what we're talking about, but also because they're the only power conference school in the state.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of it too. And look what Lane has done at Ole Miss. So I think that's a good argument to make. To move this conversation to a certain SMU football coach, I've spent a lot of time there. And 2 years ago, that story Andy referenced about their move to the ACC and how much money they spent basically buying their way in. They have, I think it's 4 or 6 billionaires on their board. And when I visited there this past year, the AD is new. Damon Evans came from Maryland. And we had a discussion in his office, and he just, his jaw sort of like hits the ground when he starts talking about the amount of money they have there and the amount of passion they have to win and to get back to the level that they were in the 80s and kind of show everybody that they can do this, that the smaller private school in the middle of Dallas that gets 30, 40,000 to a game can still compete with all these other programs. And in this era where money is like more important and resources than ever, they should be able to be that, right? And I think they've proven that, especially last year. So there's an argument for staying there because of in the route to the playoff too. That's another thing,
right? And that was always my thought: is if you're Rhett Lashley, being at SMU in the American was one thing, but being at SMU in the ACC means you can be in the playoff pretty regularly if you're doing your job properly, because they are going to support you in a way that's going to allow you to build a good roster. So there's that. But there's also the question of, do you want to be in the club, which is the SEC or the Big Ten?
Yes.
Because I look at Curt Cignetti and what he's doing in Indiana. And this is a big, and like I said, this Arkansas job story question argument is a bigger college football discussion in general. Because I look at Curt Cignetti and, we keep talking about when the Florida job opens, should they call Curt Cignetti? Obviously, they're going to try to call Lane Kiffin. If Lane Kiffin's ceiling at Ole Miss is the national title, then I don't know that you go to Florida, because that would have been the only argument for leaving Ole Miss for Florida before. But Curt Cignetti, I'm sure people will call him. If you're already making the playoff at Indiana and you're in the Big Ten and getting resources, aren't you where you need to be?
And if you're making $8 million a year or $9 million, whatever.
Yes, if you're
your
paid
salary's comparable.
Yeah. If you're paid like the Penn State coach, the Ohio State coach, like what's the difference?
Well, we're talking
Andy,
about you.
Go ahead, Godfrey.
No, I was going to say what we're talking about here would be a whipsaw effect, where this would be we are identifying a trend that would harm the most powerful programs in the sport. And anytime anything like that even shows up on the radar, historically, the sport squashes it. And I know what we're talking about.
I don't think the sport
inside.
Can.
Well, that's the thing is for the first time, the call is coming from inside the house, because we're not talking about usurpers. This sport, Bill Connolly said this years ago, and I've used it forever. This sport punishes a usurper, right? They find a way to relegate a ne'er-do-well. But this is inside your own conference. This is Indiana. This is Ole Miss. This is, we're talking about hypothetically, why couldn't it be Arkansas? I don't see how you do that. Maybe you hasten that Super League we talked about, where Ohio State and Alabama decide to go run off together.
Yeah.
So one of the things, Andy, you mentioned is being in the club, and that would be obviously the biggest benefit for making the SMU to Arkansas move, or any kind of, ACC or Big 12 move to the SEC or Big 10, is that you sort of move into that group. One of the things that came up when I did that that ACC, SMU ACC story a couple years ago was, we've made this jump from G6 to P4. Now we got to make the jump from P4 to the club or to the Super League or whatever it is.
Right.
There is a concern from everybody there in a lot of places that they're going to get left behind. And so that is at the front of everybody's mind there, and probably including the football coach.
Well, and Andy, you've talked about this with Cody Campbell, who's out there on social media saying like,
we'll be talking about Cody Campbell very soon in Ross's Congressional Minute.
I'm a lifelong Republican, but I'm worried about women's sport. No, what you're doing is you wouldn't be here if you were if you were an alumnus of Texas A&M or Texas.
Correct.
You're an alumnus of Texas
very
Tech.
different. Yeah, this argument would be different. Yes.
Yeah, I don't think he'd be making it.
Oh, and that's the thing. Arkansas is in the club. I think if there's a Super League, Arkansas is probably in the Super League. So
yeah, probably.
Just because I think the programs that are already in the SEC and the Big Ten have an advantage.
Sure.
If all that breaks down. But also, there's so much money in Arkansas. And then it's really weird. There's a gap between the people who live there and people who have traveled there for work or have been there recently. If you have not been to Northwest Arkansas recently, you don't understand.
Yeah,
like
the growth.
You may think it's just like country, Ozark. No,
I threw this out, Andy, on my other show, Phantom Island. We were talking about this yesterday. I believe that from the census is taken every 10 years, and that from it's either 90 to 2000 or 2000 to 10. I remember reporting on this, that the fastest growing region in the United States by GDP, not population, was Northwest Arkansas, where we're talking about farmland and Ozarks, and then all of a sudden you've got a world-class airport that springs up overnight. And in my other life, here's a pro wrestling story for you, kind of Andy. When we were in the pro wrestling company, and do you remember like when DVDs were a huge revenue stream? We had to fly anyone who worked in retail who's listening to this remembers this. There's a lot of people in sports industry remember this. If you wanted to be in Walmart, you did not call them on the phone. You pilgrimaged to Northwest Arkansas, and you stood in line in their lobby and you pitched them whatever it was. Everybody did this. Every major consumer brand you can think of. The effect was companies started setting up satellite offices in Northwest Arkansas. But this is a pre-Amazon world I'm talking about.
Right.
They've diminished a little bit, but the effect was that region essentially became its own sort of city state, and it's also exacerbated the dynamic between like the old power and Little Rock, where this one region of the state that's kind of young, new money blew past the old Southern traditions in places like Little Rock and Memphis and Birmingham, which is a whole other dynamic we can get into. I want to go back to Ole Miss for a second as it comes to Arkansas. Ole Miss didn't suddenly change. What changed at Ole Miss was money, and it was people with money, and it was people organizing around money. Do you know what you don't hear? You guys hear this on the mic, knock on wood, really freaking hard. What you don't hear about in Oxford is a mascot controversy or the Confederate flag. And that's not because they suddenly changed their politics. I can tell you that. It's because they realized what was more important, and a younger base of alumni who were more organized, who had gone out into the worlds of finance, into the worlds of oil and gas, and a lot of people who left Mississippi and actually went into Wall Street. A few of them I know who were my age at the university came back and said, we can better organize our money. That's why Ole Miss is number 4 in the AP. Lane Kiffin's great, okay? Lane Kiffin is a savant play caller.
Also Lane Kiffin, because you have to have the right coach.
Correct. Yes. But they've also kept Lane Kiffin. The decision here, another thing Arkansas should look at was that Ole Miss went down to the wire with Auburn over Lane Kiffin a couple years ago. Now, back in 1998, Ole Miss went down to the wire with Auburn over Tommy Tuberville, and he left because he saw a superior brand. So, again, if I'm a booster in Fayetteville or Little Rock, I'm saying, why not us if we could throw even more resources than a state like Mississippi, who has, and Ross points out, you're not alone. Everyone is together moneyed in Arkansas. Who matters? Everyone. Mississippi splits, not half, but close.
Yeah.
It's a little like LSU without the talent, probably, right? As not as talented football, high school football state.
That's a good,
you know?
No New Orleans, no I-10 like bed.
Yeah, just some of the population centers. And
you still have to get the coach right. Like it's not necessarily an LSU where the person who gets there is going to win most of the games. You do have to get that selection correct. But if you hit, it can be what Indiana is now. It can be what Ole Miss is now.
Or you just hire Bobby Petrino again.
The man who's the interim did it.
We have to talk
10
about
games, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and I don't want to get on too long or big of a pulpit, but I had a conversation with someone who gently pointed something out that I had forgotten. If you, in your mind's eye, have this nostalgic love of Bobby Petrino for that Cotton Bowl year, I want you to go back and I want you guys to think about not all, but some of the key skill position players that were on those teams. The state of Arkansas had a historically unnatural bumper crop of recruits that they did not have to...
The natural state had an unnatural bumper crop of recruits?
Ooh, that was nice. That was like a tongue twister. That was like a vocal warm-up. Bobby Petrino, not a recruiter, okay? Arkansas enjoyed a moment in the sun because of circumstances that can't be replicated again under Petrino. This is not me just...
Stephen, that was a period where being a recruiter meant something completely different. You know what now? Right. Money and evaluation.
But is Bobby Petrino going to... I mean, I don't know how many times we need to roll out this case study, guys. We're still in the transition point of I remember this and this should work and I'm nostalgic for this, but the entire all the rules of the game are different now. So the idea of going back and having the nostalgic feeling, I'm really curious how this works with Rich Rod, who's not letting his players on TikTok in the NIL revenue era. Like how is that going to work long term? Well, is Bobby going to work with a GM? Is what I'm trying to ask. Is Bobby going to work with the modern system?
Bobby Petrino found one of the greatest quarterbacks in college football history in Lamar Jackson. Probably wouldn't have gotten him if Will Muschamp hadn't been fired at Florida, but got him.
Yes.
And then when Lamar left, they just sort of folded up. They were still getting paid. They still ostensibly had the job, but they just sort of quit. And I don't know. That worries me more than anything else. The way things ended for him at Louisville worry me more than anything else. I think he'd be fine otherwise.
Yeah.
We've already done this. We've already seen a sequel at the power level, and it didn't work out. I asked our friend Statzel, Parker Fleming, who's going to work on this. He sort of texted me last night begrudgingly. Pull Lamar Jackson's stats out of the second run at Louisville. Like separate it. It's almost like it's a little bit like a war sort of formula in baseball.
Oh yeah. It was Lamar Jackson. It was very Cam Newton-esque. Yeah.
Andy, I would say
Nick Fairley.
Yeah, I would say it's even more dramatic than the Cam Newton effect in 2010. And that's great. You got him. You identified him. But I would also say that Louisville, historically going all the way back to Schnellenberger, good morning, they've had a Florida to Louisville pipeline for decades. Right. So I don't really give Bobby Petrino that much credit. They've always been
pretty good. And I think Jeff Brom's going to wind up being very successful there. So
no doubt.
It's not... That would be, but here's the thing, and this is what I keep telling people about the Bobby Petrino thing. And I think if you ask Bobby Petrino, he'd say he really wished they'd have kept Sam Pittman for 3 more games to save $3 million on the buyout. Here's Arkansas's remaining schedule for those who don't know.
Yeah,
they're brutal. Off this week, but then it goes at Tennessee, Texas A&M, Auburn, Mississippi State, at LSU, at Texas, Missouri. Bobby Petrino did not get to sign any new defensive players when he became the interim. Guys, it's not going to go well.
He did fire the defensive staff.
Yeah, he did actually. Yeah,
he did. He cleaned defensive staff house.
I think tactically, based on the history of what we used to affectionately call the Shroud of the Ozarks, because it became very cultish. You know, the idea of public records request for your coach's cell phone, that started in this fan base, folks. This thing, you can go back and check your recent history. I think it's an extremely tactical move by Hunter Yurachek and by certain people in the northwest corner of this state against some people in Little Rock to say, all right, this is what you want. He publicly said on Sunday, the AD said, our interim head coach has expressed interest in this job. And rather than turn it into another message board saga, I think he very tactically and shrewdly said, this is Bobby Petrino. We all know what he's about. He wants this job. And then, Andy, to your point, he said, we're going to evaluate him. But I think what he did was he gave him the trap door, because that schedule and this roster, Ross, you were on the beat at LSU when it kind of felt like there was a magic number in Ed Orgeron's interim year, where, you know, he was politicking the media, he was politicking Joe Oliva, the AD at the time, and it felt like, well, if he could just win 4 or he could just win this, I don't see a path like that here for Bobby Petrino just because of the quality of the roster, and I don't think he could lay hands on them and suddenly win 5.
If let's put it this way, if he were to win 4 or 5 games against the remainder of this schedule, he give him a lifetime contract.
Yeah,
no
4
doubt.
and 3,
because he's
like
a
4 and 3 go to a bowl. He's going to get the job, I would imagine.
The dude, he's an incorrigible human being. If this guy wins 5 this season, he should be the head coach.
Yeah, he should be the emperor of Arkansas if he wins 5 against the rest of the schedule.
Yeah,
well,
it is funny. Like,
don't do that.
Hunter
He'd reinstitute prima nocta.
How Hunter handled the AD handled that, because like it is unusual, right, to release in a statement, like in a release, like to release that the interim coach has expressed interest and he's a candidate for the job. I mean, there were like 4 sentences in that release, and that was one of them, you know, and it's just like, it doesn't, that's sort of unusual. I remember, going back to when I covered Les Miles was fired after maybe game 4.
Yeah,
so there was 8
game.
There's 8 games left in. I think the idea was that if Ed Orgeron could go 6-2, that was the number. He probably would get the job.
And you remember the Florida game,
he went
right,
5-3. He went 5-3, didn't he?
Because Darius Geis in the Florida game.
Yeah.
So. It is funny because most interims are like, shout out to Doug Meacham right now, even for firing Todd Grantham on a Sunday, because it's very much like Doug Meacham is like, hey, look, to the roster. He's like, hey, look, your parents broke up. It's pretty messy around here. Like, he's got a lot of substitute gym teacher energy right now, where he's like, look, I'm lovable. We're going to play dodgeball until lunch, and then we're going to watch a movie. You guys want to watch Jurassic Park? That's great. Oh, Todd Grantham, is he bothering you guys? Well, he sucks anyway, so he's fired. Let's just, you know what, guys? Let's just play tag outside until it's time to go home. That's usually what you're getting in an interim
what
head
Ed
coach.
Orgeron did as the interim at USC after Lane was fired.
They got ice cream
Lane
trucks
took
at
your
practice.
cookies away. I'm bringing them back in the dining hall.
Ed Orgeron, pro cookie.
And this is why I still contend any program that wants to fire their head coach in the first month of the season should hire Ed Orgeron for the rest of the year. Not
he's available. He seems like he wants to coach again.
Oh my God, it's money in the bank. Yes, he just comes running in and he goes, all right, who's ready? Let's go 7 games. Let's watch a video.
He wins you 4 games over 2 months.
Oh my God.
You pay him $3 million, and then he does it again the next year. I've been preaching this. It's my business model. I keep telling his agent he needs to do this, and nobody will listen to me.
Oh my God. You're right. He's the fun
interim
camp
for
counselor.
life.
Ooh.
The great interim coach of all time.
How much fun would UCLA be to watch right now? Or Virginia
That's
Tech?
what I'm saying.
Oh, man.
But nobody listens to me.
Damn.
Gentlemen, I should correct the record real quick, Andy, before we go off.
Yeah.
Ed Orgeron ended up being 5-2. And so 6-1 was sort of like thought to be like, hey, you can lose to Alabama, but you got to beat everybody else. And they ended up, of course, they lost that Florida game, and Darius Geis ran the wrong way. No. And Tom Herman said no. Yeah, that's the main part.
Because he was going to
that
Texas.
Happened. Yeah,
man.
Oh my gosh.
We should revisit that one in the offseason.
So 4-3, Petrino go 4-3, which means he probably will have 2, maybe 3 upsets in there. Because they're probably going to be underdog in almost every game.
Andy, speaking of, you guys are going to have to put me on some sort of prescription grade sedative when Hugh Freeze's Auburn plays Bobby Petrino's Arkansas.
Loser leaves town match.
No.
Except when somebody's already left town.
I just want to be with Houston Nutt, which I've never said. I want to be near Houston Nutt that week. I just want, like, that's the embed. I'll go back to hardcore journalism. I just want to sit in the living room.
Some people will get hipped that week. Gentlemen, we have to talk about Ross's Congressional Minute, which is going to go longer than a minute because there is a new bill in the U.S. Senate, and it's not the one that we thought it was going to be. We'll be right back. We are back on the College Football Enquirer, and it is my favorite time of every week, Ross's Congressional Minute.
Senate Democrats are introducing a college sports bill that amends the Sports Broadcasting Act to permit schools to jointly negotiate their TV rights. The theory behind this, as we know, is the revenues would increase under a consolidated agreement. And again, the theory is that schools will use the extra cash to continue to fund women's and Olympic sports. In fact, there's a requirement for schools to maintain their funding of Olympic sports in the bill. The SAFE Act also permits athletes to transfer twice without penalty, has scholarships and medical care guarantees, an agent registry, blah, 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 settlement stuff. But what it doesn't have in the bill is the most interesting. Unlike the SCORE Act, the SAFE Act does not prohibit college athletes from becoming employees and does not grant NCAA and conferences limited liability protection to enforce their rules. Speaking of the SCORE Act, last week a member of the Congressional Black Caucus said publicly that Republican authors of the SCORE Act have agreed to changes. 2 of 4 changes in the bill that the caucus is concerned over. Getting support from the Black Caucus members is essential to pushing the SCORE Act across the goal line when or if it arises when the House for a vote next week. Caucus members and the Republicans continue to negotiate on the other concerns.
That was incredible.
Yeah, there we go.
Wow. Okay, within the first 20 seconds, wait, you said there's a bill in the Senate, but it's not the Ted Cruz bill. You said the Democrats put it out.
Yes.
So this is like Cory Booker and Richard Blumenthal?
And Maria Cantwell. Yeah, so Maria Cantwell, Cory Booker, and Richard Blumenthal. It originated actually from Maria Cantwell's office, and then she got the other 2 involved, and she's trying to get some more involved. The sort of the juicy drama of this is that the Senate Democrats sort of rushed a bill out there before Ted Cruz and the Republicans who have been working on a bill sort of, not, I don't want to say quietly, but certainly behind the closed doors.
That would kind of dovetail with the SCORE Act, right?
Yeah, sort of, yeah, right. And so the Democrats kind of rushed this bill out there with, of course, the sort of jaw-dropping concept of opening up the Sports Broadcasting Act, which we know has been a topic lately.
That part is really interesting, the Sports Broadcasting Act. We've talked about it on the show, so you guys know what we're talking about here, and we'll get into that in a second. But I wanted to point something out when I was reading the bill last night, Ross, because the text of it seemed alarmingly similar to something else I read in July. And that would be the Donald J. Trump executive order regarding college sports, which is strange that a bill originating from 3 Democrats essentially is a rewrite of one of Donald Trump's executive orders.
Yeah, I think to a degree. And of course, the link between the Senate Democrats and Donald Trump's executive order is the Texas billionaire that we've discussed plenty on the show, and Cody Campbell, who has all the commercials that encouraging the lawmakers to amend the Sports Broadcasting Act. And he's the one behind a lot of the delay of the SCORE Act because he wants it to amend SBA. So there's a link there, and there is some similarities to the executive order. There's certainly requirements around Olympic and women's sports, scholarship sort of roster requirements that we saw in the executive order. Now, the EO didn't, open the SBA or anything like that.
Right.
But it certainly, we don't really know. It's like
they tacked the SBA part onto the executive order, basically.
Yeah.
Which is
somewhat, yeah.
So
now
this is everything Cody wanted, basically.
In a lot of ways, yeah,
which is amazing to me because you have Democrats in the Senate carrying water for an oil and gas billionaire from Texas, who I'm sure is not a Democrat,
who's Republican.
No, he tweeted he was tweeting yesterday about it. Yeah.
And then also, and we've talked about this on the show, it's not just Cody Campbell. There are several private equity entities that want this to happen because they want to be the ones that essentially provide the seed money for the whatever comes out of this the pooled resources and then get the money out of it.
And let's be clear, there's plenty of non-Big Ten and SEC administrators and coaches, some of them who've been public, some of them who've been more private about it, who do want to see the Sports Broadcasting Act opened up.
I was watching Big 12 games this week and seeing Score Act commercials, but I would think if you're Brett Yormark or if you're Jim Phillips at the ACC, you prefer this thing because of the Sports Broadcasting Act thing. If it works the way they want it to, and again, it's a double-edged sword.
I was going to ask you to walk that out.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's explain it for people if people haven't heard it. So, Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961 is the law that allows NFL teams, NBA teams, NHL teams, MLB teams to pool their rights as one. So the Steelers and the Cowboys can get together and sell their TV rights, and then some UFL team can't sue them and say you're colluding. And it's a limited antitrust exemption. So it's not like what they're trying to get in the SCORE Act, which is essentially a get out of jail free card that even the railroads don't have anymore. This is a very limited antitrust exemption that, as sports have evolved, you can make the argument that major college sports are essentially the same business as the NFL or MLB. So that's why. So, and it's interesting because they've done this, like colleges have done this before. They had the CFA after the Supreme Court decision in the 80s.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Theoretically, that could have been challenged on antitrust grounds. It never was. But it's the reason you don't see the SEC and the Big Ten getting together and selling their rights as one. Now they can't because it would be challenged. And but what I find interesting about this, Ross, is the SEC and the Big Ten don't want this. And Steve Scalise, the House Majority Leader, he's from Louisiana. You quoted him in your story talking about why the House Republicans behind the SCORE Act don't want this. And he sounded really strangely like Greg Sankey. I believe they almost used exactly the same words. Where they said, well, we want people to we want to honor the contracts that are existing. They're already So what's funny is Greg Sankey know we're not that stupid, right? Like they understand if they amend the Sports Broadcasting Act, it doesn't mean the SEC has to rip up its contract with ESPN. It's like I can go to Colorado and smoke all the weed I want because it's allowed. But if I go to Denver right now, I'm probably not going to because I don't really like it. So, like, if they change the law, the SEC does not have to immediately rip up its contract.
You don't have to do that, right? Yeah. Although the SEC might want to because it's probably undervalued.
Do people not Greg Sankey's really smart, and I'm sure Steve Scalise's really smart, but do they not realize that's nonsense? Like when they make that, it's complete and utter nonsense.
Andy, by the way, I love that you're putting the Italian Scalise on his on Scalise, but I like the Scalise.
I'm not political enough.
It's Louisiana. You're allowed.
He's from Louisiana. Sorry,
mispronounce it.
Yes.
No,
I also like that I like that sports writing's foremost food expert does not smoke weed. This is like it's like you don't take PEDs. Right, everyone in the industry trusts your food recommendations.
Yeah, in a past life, I might have once or twice partaken.
Okay.
And the number of loaves of white bread downed is just dangerous. We can't have it again. Can't have it happen.
Bread, white bread.
Yeah, white bread.
Like imagine the late '90s. Something. South Park is brand new.
Okay,
like it's season 1 probably.
You're just eating white bread.
Eating white bread.
Okay. One slice no barbecue sauce, just white bread.
Just raw dog and a loaf of wonder.
Okay. Wow, I'm sure it was. Yeah.
Well, I officially derailed this segment. Sorry, Russ.
Good job, Godfrey.
No, but but the Senate bill, there's not much of a chance of this, right? Because it doesn't have.
That's what I was going to talk about. Is like because people are asking, like, well, what's the legitimate, possibilities of this? And they're very low. Obviously, it's not bipartisan. There's no Republicans on board. But I think it's notable for a few reasons. One, as Andy already mentioned, the similarities with a Republican president's executive order, that the Senate Democrats are aligning somewhat with that, right, is one notation. Two, that they will actually have a bill now that amends the Sports Broadcasting Act. I think is somewhat relevant, that it's become that big of a talking point right now, that it's found its way into legislation. And 3, this may make it more difficult for the Senate to produce a bipartisan bill from Ted Cruz and potentially Chris Coons from Delaware, who they've been working together. Because now Mr. Coons, who I'm sure the Democrats, Marie Cantwell, Booker, and Blumenthal, are trying to get on their bill, right? He's been talking to Cruz about a bipartisan bill that would have a better shot in the Senate. And now his caucus is doing this thing over here. And it's gonna make it more difficult. But to put sort of a bow on the SCORE Act versus the SAFE Act sort of argument, this is also going to make it probably difficult, as we knew it would be, for the SCORE Act to get through the Senate. It's going to slow down everything for it to get through the Senate. And important notes make the important differences in the SAFE versus the SCORE Act, so the Senate versus the House bill, is that, well, obviously the SAFE Act is just Democrats. It includes the Sports Broadcasting Act,
but not any other antitrust exemption.
Right. It doesn't include any other antitrust exemption. So the NCAA would not, in the conferences, most of the conferences, would not be in support of it. And also, it doesn't have the anti-employment clause.
So this is where I was going. So the Democrat-sponsored bill right now would allow for potential unionization, or
it would allow for most of the common
friendly
sense things that would actually allow them to fix this stuff, but they don't want to do. So that's...
So if we are drawing this a little bit on party lines, the Democratic-sponsored bill would be a little bit more favorable to the agency of the player overall and future organization capacity or capability.
Yep.
And then the Republican-sided, well, potentially bipartisan, would still protect. Let me back up a sec. You said the NCAA. What power do they have left here, and would they have? You said they wouldn't support that. Would that matter at all, or are we in the semantic territory now?
Well, the schools are the NCAA,
right? But I'm saying, just from a lobbying standpoint, would this matter?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think
how much sway do they have over the how this is coming together? Is what I'm asking.
Significant sway. Significant. Yeah. Okay. Significant. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it's pretty clear. I mean, think about the House bill, the SCORE Act, and the people involved, as Andy already mentioned, one name, there's a significant influence from the conferences and the schools.
Yeah, and the SEC and the Big Ten are really driving the SCORE Act
via the NCAA. Again, so they're still using the NCAA.
If they did not want to keep the power gap where it was, they'd be all over the sports broadcasting thing, because of the double-edged sword of the Sports Broadcasting Act. If you change it, is if you play your cards wrong, the SEC and the Big Ten get together, sell their rights,
they could do it themselves,
and leave the rest of you by the side of the road.
Yeah, correct. They could do it themselves. Absolutely.
Yeah. So if I'm listening at home and I hear, well, the SEC wants this and the Big Ten, they're sort of semi-aligned here. But when you mention the NCAA, that is still sort of being used as a straw man or a proxy for the schools as an organized body.
The SCORE Act, with the antitrust exemption that the SCORE Act would give them, if they wanted to roll everything back, other than the rev share, whatever's memorialized in the law.
Yeah. And right. The transfer
If they wanted to roll everything else
transfers,
back, they could roll it all back. Yeah. They would have basically unlimited power to unilaterally impose things on the players. There'd be no legal recourse for the players. It is a legitimate get out of jail free card.
Yeah, there's no private right of action, although so there's some changes that, as I mentioned in the minute, the Congressional Black Caucus has argued for, that they have started to change here and there to make the SCORE Act, the House bill, a little more athlete sort of friendly, trying to get it more on the lines of bipartisan. So they're starting to work through that.
See, the thing is, the only way they can actually pass this thing is they're going to have to dismantle that antitrust exemption. And the people who want it passed, that's the deal breaker for them. So this is the problem.
And then just real fast, just for clarity, in that doomsday scenario that Andy outlined, wouldn't that just leave them open for massive amounts, another decade's worth of litigation from players and their representatives?
Yeah, that's why they're
that's why they would not see this happen.
Support. Yeah, they would. That's why they would not support the SAFE Act. They would support the SCORE Act, which especially they're pushing is the eligibility standards, right? Because we've seen lawsuits and we've seen player eligibility extend in certain.
Right.
I think the
Which
NCAA.
I actually think if that got taken to the Supreme Court, I think the schools would win that.
Yeah, well, the schools are winning.
They're winning most of them.
I say the schools, the NCAA.
Right.
The schools
but
are
the schools,
supporting sometimes their athlete to get more years.
That's true.
So I think the latest, and I don't know how to pronounce his last name. We're going to botch it up. He's the Boise State professor. Sam, no, not Scalise. Sam something. He's been keeping track of these eligibility cases, and he does a really good job with it. And I think the NCAA, there's been 30 or 31 eligibility cases filed. I think the NCAA is 23-7. So it's only lost 7 of the cases that have been ruled in a preliminary way by judges. So I think, Andy, you've got a point that if it gets to the Supreme Court, maybe the judge again will rule in favor of the NCAA. So one of the things the SCORE Act does is create.
There's a pro-competitive justification for it. I think the audience wants them to be like college students and not 35-year-old dudes who've been there for 13 years.
I mean, it's the big separator of pro and I think amateur or whatever, or college, is that it's college. It tethered to college education. This might be the big tether.
This might be the first time in the last 5-10 years where public sentiment would actually side with the NCAA on a major matter. Yeah. And
that's the thing. Like, it doesn't mean they're going to lose every case. I do think there's a line, and antitrust is all about, consumer protection, essentially. And so it also protects workers and protects other smaller businesses. So, but ultimately, if you can justify that something makes you a stronger business or it makes you more consumer friendly, then and I think that would make you more consumer friendly, because I don't think people want 35-year-old Diego Pavia in college. And
this is the biggest,
as much as I love watching him now,
35-year-old Diego
biggest
Pavia
thing
is awesome.
That's being argued by the NCAA and the Power Conference lobbyists on the Hill. This is the biggest thing: is eligibility standards help us preserve eligibility standards and give us this antitrust. Now, there's some underlying other things in there, right? Like, well, with this antitrust, we'll also do potentially all these other things, like restrict transfers.
Oh, if they get the antitrust exemption, they will dial the clock as far back as they can and take all the power they can away from the players, which is why it's never going to pass.
But then we go back to court.
I'm just telling you, it's never going to pass that way.
But if that happens, then we just all go back to court and we start back at a couple steps back. You can't go back
to court because you have an antitrust exemption. You would actually have to get Congress to change the law again. You remember I said the railroads used to have this and now they don't? The railroads antitrust exemption was stripped away in the early 2000s.
So what you're saying is in that doomsday scenario for players, then you wouldn't get into the individual litigation cases because the law would then just stamp it out, this newly passed act.
It's a get out of jail free card.
Yeah.
But that won't pass
Now they call
anyway.
it, some Greg Sankey said this at the Congressional Black Caucus event last week. I quoted him in my story. He says that he's never gone to the Hill and asked for an antitrust exemption. He's asked for a limited liability protection. Now they're arguing
that's not what's in the SCORE Act.
The SCORE Act, if you read it, it gives a pretty significant protection where many legal experts would call it an antitrust exemption.
Which, by the way, there was probably some wiggle room and negotiating room.
Yes, for sure.
Would strip some of the power away from
like
that.
If it gets to the Senate, it has to have 60 votes. Mm-hmm. It's obviously not passing in its current form. As we said,
written, it will
would
not
have
pass.
to be negotiated. So why not start? Wait, I think the college's point, right, is like, well, we're going to start here, and we'll inch our way.
And that's the smart way to negotiate. They're doing it. Yeah. They're doing it right. If to get what they want, they're doing it right. If they want to land on a limited, if they want to land on limited protection, then that's probably where they're going to land, and it will seem palatable. So it is, to your point, Ross, a fairly smart strategy.
Yeah. So let's put a bow on. Okay, what happens now? Like what now?
That's what I was about to ask.
Now, the SAFE Act the Senate bill. I think the Democrats over there, as I said, are trying to get Chris Coons of Delaware over to caucus with them instead of partnering with Ted Cruz on a bill. That's something to watch over the next few weeks on what Chris Coons does and how many other Democrats join the SAFE Act. So that's going on in the Senate. And if Chris Coons does leave and caucus of the Democrats, you may see Ted Cruz and Republicans, Senator Young, some others introduce a Republican bill. So we'll have two fun bills in the Senate that say different things. And now the House, what's going on with the SCORE Act is that they're continuing to negotiate with the Congressional Black Caucus and other Republicans to ease their concerns on the bill, which the hope is it comes back up next month and potentially gets to the floor for a vote. We'll see. There are 4 things the Congressional Black Caucus is asking. I should say, I'm speaking like the whole 59-member Congressional Black Caucus is negotiating. No, just a task force. And really, they only need 5, 7, 10 members of the Black Caucus to sort of get on board for this thing to progress forward. They're asking for 4 things. They've kind of agreed to 2 of the 4 of the Republicans, so they're in the middle of negotiating more. So big month next month to watch what Coons does in the Senate. Does he go Democrat and caucus with the Democrats on the SAFE bill, or does he go with Ted Cruz? And then watching what other matters get resolved between the Black Caucus and the Republican authors of the SCORE Act.
It's going to be fascinating to watch. You know what was fascinating to watch? College football last week, because there were so many good games. But why were there so many more good games that week than the week before and the week after? It's been driving Steven Godfrey crazy.
You did it.
Let him stand on. I did not do it.
No, you fed me this idea.
Well, okay. Blame me for that. Blame me for this too. We're going to let Steven Godfrey get on his soapbox when we come back. We are back at the College Football Enquirer, and you might have noticed that last week's schedule was a little bit loaded. That a couple of the 3:30 games, and certainly 2 of the night games, were probably bigger than most of the games this week, other than, say, Florida State, Miami, which is, of course, monumental. Not much else going on this week. Now, if Vandy beats Alabama, sure. But it's not the same thing as knowing you have Auburn, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, LSU, Georgia and Alabama, Ohio State at Washington, Oregon at Penn State, all happening within hours of one another.
Yes.
Guys, why can't they just figure this out? Split this up a little better.
For the purposes of this discussion, we record about a 60-minute show every Sunday, recapping the Saturday's events, right? You could take an entire group of games we didn't get to and create a headline week out of them. Do you know that we did not discuss Tennessee, Mississippi State? I think we may have just mentioned the outcome in passing. Right. That could be an anchor game this weekend, right now, this weekend, right? I don't know if we mentioned at all Iowa State, who's now 5-0, right? Beating a then undefeated Arizona team. I think we briefly discussed Iowa, Indiana, and the fact that Indiana did that thing that I predicted that you'd have to go to Iowa and beat Iowa to beat Iowa. Did I just say that correctly? I think I did. That was good. That's good. This is fine in and of itself. That we had a packed week. We should not look at the bounty of college football offering and necessarily say, you know what, this is terrible. Because, hey, we got a long offseason, right, guys? Sometimes we got like 9-10 months where we don't get to talk about anything that actually happened on a football field. So why am I complaining right now in late September about good football? Because you haven't looked at the schedule yet, have you? The next 2 weeks are not terrible. We're going to watch. We're going to find things to enjoy. There's no such thing as a bad
college football weekend. Let's start there.
But we have a paucity by comparison over the next 2 weeks, thank you, of top matchups versus the embarrassing abundance that we had this previous weekend. Now, this is all fine and good, and some of this is rooted in our fandom, and some of this for us is rooted in our jobs, which is we're trying to sort of drink from the fire hose on a Saturday where you could have had 5 games in any of the major slots. I always speak in God's time zone, that's Central, so 11, 2:30, and then going into the 6, right? Mm-hmm. Primetime's kind of mushy now. It like used to be sort of one thing, but it's a little bit more staggered. So those 3 blocks, we had anywhere from 5 to 7 games you could have keyed on to find something relevant to the very top of college football, let alone like even I didn't touch the G5 last weekend. Okay. So my question, more than just like fandom or being a sports media person who has to pay attention to these things, is I wonder if this is just bad for the inventory. And this is what I would like to offer out, because if I work at Disney or Fox, and that's basically the 2 companies that own the most inventory in our sport. Not all of it, but pretty close to it. I've got to prop up the next 2 weekends, right? I've got to find games that are big ratings hits, right? I've got to invest. We're taking game day somewhere. We're taking Big Noon Saturday somewhere. So let me appeal to the capitalist equation here for these television networks. I know that college football has no central governance. I don't know if you guys just heard or watched the last segment. Clearly, this is basically just a sort of perpetual civil war amongst feudal states. But why not try to arrange this a little bit better just for the benefit of television ratings? Now,
yes, for the benefit of all of you making more money.
Yeah. Now, I know the immediate pushback is going to be, well, how do we know what's going to be a headline game, right? We didn't know Indiana, Iowa was going to be as important as it could. We didn't know. Well, you had a pretty good idea, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Tennessee, Mississippi State. We didn't know that Mississippi State was going to necessarily be as good as it. Well, you had a pretty good idea, right? And you could. There's not a perfect science to this without saying, like, telling schools, a month out, hey, we're moving your game back 2 weeks. Which, by the way, season ticket holders, tailgaters, obviously that would be a nightmare scenario for them. Let alone the schools, the logistics, football ops. I'm not suggesting that, but I know for a fact that the NFL spends a significant amount of time. I think they started basically a couple weeks after the Super Bowl, and they look at the following year's schedule and they start planning out amongst all of their concerns, but balance and television distribution amongst their partners. Because now you're talking about not just the major networks, not just the cable arm, but also the streamers. You got Netflix, you got Prime on Thursdays, you got all these different concerns. And the goal is to smooth that bad boy out as evenly as possible, right? This sport does not do that for a variety of reasons we've acknowledged previously. It is harming the sport, in my opinion, because the next 2 weeks, there are several games that occurred this past weekend that could have had marquee moments. Andy, we've been calling Missouri the quietest college football team in the country, or how could you be a sleeper head coach if you're in the SEC? That's one example of a school maybe you pull out and showcase in one of these better arranged time slots. That's it. That's the rant. It's not really a rant. I'm trying to appeal. I'm not hollering this week. Thank you.
No,
very good. And it's
true.
It's at the center, right, Andy, of like we just talked to link this to the past conversation we just talked about. The SBA and private equity and all this stuff. I mean, every Super League private equity backed thing you see has one main component, and it is universal scheduling to match up bigger brands with one another and space them out across the season.
Wait, you mean the Cowboys and the Packers, 2 mega brands in the NFL?
Yeah.
They played that on Sunday night for a reason. Instead of making it one of 9 games, they played at 1 p.m. 1 p.m. Eastern time on Sunday. Why? Why would you do that?
No, and that's the increased value. You talk about the sports opening up the Sports Broadcasting Act and how that will generate more revenue, maybe 2 to 3 times. And part of it is because you would have a universal scheduling model, you would think, and you would pair bigger brands with one another and space things out. And that is probably needs to happen. And some leaders have discussed that, right? I think it was Sankey at an event maybe like a year ago or so, like just kind of threw that out there, like, well, maybe we should get together and talk about that. And of course, it hasn't happened. And partly when I ask why it hasn't happened is because everybody's represented by different TV networks,
yes,
right?
And
centralized
governance.
Down.
Centralized governance,
but
Ross.
see,
that's
the
what we're missing
NFL
here.
Also is televised on many different networks. But
yes,
those networks have to come crawling to the NFL for the scraps that the NFL wants to give them, because the NFL is included in the Sports Broadcasting Act.
and you pay for a pecking order. You pay, you renegotiate your deal for Monday night or Thursday night on Prime, and you pay for a particular quality of inventory.
Right.
And then the
ESPN
beauty is,
had to pay more and kowtow a little bit to the NFL because they were getting crap games on Monday night.
yeah.
So
and
the
now-
NFL started
and-
giving them better games on Monday night.
Or and when
Last
they can't,
night
and
excluded.
when they can't provide marquee, Andy, what do? They double up. They actually just increase the inventory. And then what do you do at the very bottom of this when like no one in America wants to watch Texans Titans? Well, then you put that Sunday in the 1 p.m. Eastern slot. That's the beauty of this. The problem is this can't ever occur if you don't have a centralized body representing the entire inventory. Otherwise, what you're going to have is a logjam.
Even by conference, they could do this better.
Yes.
And because we'll go to the Big Ten, for example. Somebody at the Big Ten, after Indiana got good last year, realizing that Indiana would be good again next year, should have said, okay, did you realize we have Indiana at Iowa on the same day Ohio State goes to Washington and on the same day that Oregon goes to Penn State? And oh, by the way, that's not Fox. That's not a Fox first choice week. USC's going to Illinois. Illinois is good too.
That's a top 25 game, both teams.
Right. So why are we having Iowa on Peacock when that should be NBC's featured primetime game in a different week?
This week, Andy, just to compare, what you just laid out a superstar day if you are just a Big Ten football fan.
Right.
This week, by comparison, a moribund Wisconsin team goes to Michigan. Illinois, Purdue.
Big noon. Yep.
Okay. Illinois, Purdue, Penn State, UCLA. That'll be a mercy killing. And then the only thing that comes, secretly the best game of the week is Washington, Maryland.
Sue the Big Ten because they've gotten absolute garbage out of this deal. Like they've gotten garbage for what they're paying top dollar for it.
I don't want to make fun of Purdue. Well, this week they haven't done anything.
Well, Gary Danielson gets to do his alma mater one more time. That's what it is.
I looked up a couple weeks ago. I was doing like a quad box and I was keying on a primary. That's how I try to survive a time slot and like know what's going on. And CBS has this majestic television presentation. They put more cameras on the field, more cameras in the stadium. It feels very cinematic. This is why they were such a great partner for the SEC for years. And they have not declined in quality of television production since they've moved over to the Big Ten. But I laughed to myself because I think it was the USC Purdue game, which was kind of a snoozer.
That was every time getting one more Purdue. Right.
And I'm looking up and I'm seeing this like majestic sort of cinematic primetime production value for a crap game at Purdue.
Yeah.
And this isn't the first time I've seen CBS give a white glove treatment to airport fast food.
Yeah, CBS got ripped off. Like CBS was stupid because when the SEC went to CBS and said, hey, you have this incredible below market deal for the best SEC game every week. I realize we have a few more years left on that deal, but how about you slide us a couple more bucks? Because you're still going to be getting a really good deal. And CBS is like, no, we'll keep paying way below market. And the SEC is like, cool, you're dead to us now.
Yeah.
And I believe they're paying roughly the same, right now for the second/third Big Ten game as what ESPN is paying for the number one SEC. It's pretty wild. Yeah.
Yeah.
I dove into that story a couple of years ago. And
the cleaners.
As Andy, as you mentioned, like I sort of dove into that story a couple of years ago about the split, the CBS SEC split, or maybe it was last year, last fall, whenever the last CBS game was for the SEC, and it was amazing how years before with just some little tweaks and just an extra bone here or there, they probably could have been still part of the package, but they pushed back when the SEC added Texas A&M.
That's how you get USC,
Missouri, and there you go.
2 weeks from now. So 2 weeks from now, it's closer to what Andy is pitching, which is as of right now, a top 25 game for Big Noon, which is Ohio State, Illinois. Then CBS gets the best game of the day, which is Indiana, Oregon, in the Big Ten, I'm just saying. And then NBC in primetime gets Michigan, USC, which, regardless of quality,
that's what
you roll
CBS
the helmets
and
out.
NBC are paying for. Yes. But
it doesn't normally work that way.
Yeah. There's going to be two. We'll have, okay, that's 2 weeks from now, right? So that's going to be week 8.
Week 7.
No, that'll be week 8.
Well, it's week 7 in the Yahoo app. So what I mean.
Okay. So, no, you're right. It'll be week 7. So 2 of the first 7 weeks of the season, they will have gotten what they paid for, and the other ones they will have not.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And
that sounds like a bad deal to me.
We're TBD after week 8. They haven't arranged it yet.
Right.
I will be curious how they serve these. They serve more masters than obviously SEC does because it's all a Disney operation now. I will be curious to see for the rest of the year how they keep everyone happy-ish. But so what you're saying, Andy, is that and so financially the pecking order is Fox, Big Noon, priority. NBC
it depends on the week.
Is a limited deal, right?
It depends on the week. CBS and NBC do get first choice certain weeks.
So okay.
There's a draft. They draft weeks. So when they have the draft in the offseason, the first week that gets drafted is the final week of the season. So Fox grabs that so they can get Ohio State, Michigan, and then it works out from there. Fox has most of the first pick, most of the number 1 picks, but not all of them.
So Fox annually goes in and basically says we want Ohio State, Michigan, and then we'll start the rest of the conversation.
Right. And remember, Fox actually owns all of the rights because of the structure of the Big Ten Network deal. Fox is sub-licensing these games to NBC and CBS, and so it's very, very complicated.
It's good for business. You just need to be a better business partner if you're the Big Ten.
But actually, it's not good for business. You could do it better for business. You could make more money another way.
Well, yeah, if you brought in the hated rivals down south, I'm just saying, like, I like the idea of parsing out the inventory to television partners. That historically has been a good business plan.
They could do it. They could do it better within their own conferences.
Yes,
but they could also do it better together. But again, that would require congressional action. But there's a bill now, so
bring back Jefferson Pilot.
That bill's not going to pass.
JP Sports. Dave.
Oh. I want some standard definition. I want Vanderbilt beating South Carolina 16-13 while everyone's painfully hungover in standard definition.
Our producer TJ is telling us we have to wrap.
Got to wrap it up.
That's because the youth today, they don't respect JP. That's why they don't know.
We're going to pay the proper damn respect to Jefferson Pilot Sports that gave you not 1, not 2, but 3 Daves. 3 guys named Dave. And they were the worst at identifying what a penalty was.
Oh, man.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
Like, you could watch a player rip another player's helmet off and beat him to death with it on camera. And the Daves would be like, I think it might be offsides. I'm not sure.
Oh, man.
Who could know?
My childhood.
They only had 3 cameras
Dave.
for the entire game, so.
And the best is they give you scores from the other games, and it'd be the third quarter, and they'd be giving you first quarter scores.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. You could hear the paper rustling in the booth. It was fantastic. Ross and I were in Mississippi schools at a particular time, so we absorbed a lot of JP inventory.
Yep.
Lots
of Dave.
I covered a JP game where Ron Zook got croomed. So.
Oh yeah, I was there. I was a student. Yeah, student reporter.
All right.
Yep.
Were you one of the? You weren't one of the students who was asleep when the game started, and that was the funniest part.
Not.
From the press box, you could see the students streaming into the stadium. This is the 2004 Florida Mississippi State game. You could see the students streaming into the stadium in the third quarter because they're like, "Oh crap, we're gonna win!"
Yeah, wait a second. What's happening? Jarius Norwood ran for 500 yards.
Yeah. J-Rock, baby. J-Rock,
yeah.
Atlanta Falcons legend.
So, this is a long way of saying we just complained about a bunch of stuff, but it's still better than it used to be. So
that's progress,
you know what else
baby.
is better? We got another one of these on Thursday. We got some big games to talk about. Florida State hosting Miami is the feature game of the weekend. We'll definitely get into that. Plus, I got a feeling I actually won one again. Can I do it a third time in a row? Probably not. We'll talk to you Thursday.